right, party time. Welcome everyone to the 11th podcast. I have a special guest for you today. His name is Daniel Brook, Operation Manager and Leader at NES Fircroft. Daniel, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Simon. Good to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you here because you're going to talk today about your experience in the alternative energy sector, which we have never discussed with any of our guests so far. So I'm very excited to talk with you about that. But before we go there, I want to know your life story. Like, who's Daniel? How did you end up in Dubai? Do you have a family?
Everyone's always got a backstory, hey? So, look, I mean, I'm Dan. I'm from Yorkshire in the UK. For those of you who don't know where Yorkshire is, it's a great part of the world and you should definitely go and visit. But I studied engineering at Loughborough University. I was at Loughborough University because, I have a very strong background in sport. So I represented Great Britain for triathlon. So I was based in Loughborough University because that's where the British triathlon team were. So I was very lucky to have a professional career in sport for 3 years after leaving university, and then had to get a real job and start earning some money. So I started my career in recruitment, working in the London power recruitment market. I then had 3 years in Western Australia doing oil and gas recruitment and moved to Dubai in 2016.
Wow. And don't you miss those periods when you were an athlete?
Yeah, look, I mean, I had a great run at the sporting career. It was such a good opportunity to travel the world. I spent time in South Africa. I spent time, in basically every weekend I was in a different country, representing your country. But I got to, 25, 26, and you start to think about, what the future holds for you in the next 5 to 10 years. And, this is a lot of the conversations that we have about, what's your long-term plan?
Yeah.
With my long-term plan, the outlook was not too great. It was kind of, I can continue doing what I'm doing. I'd probably reached, the peak of how I could perform physically. And, for me, I'm all about getting the most out of myself and high performance. So, I kind of thought, well, rather than spend the next 5 years doing something that I'm going to be mediocre at, how's about I, make a break now and look for something that's going to be a long-term career for me.
Smart move. Must not have been easy to think a couple of steps ahead, but reflecting back, it's a crucial decision that you made. And then you ended up in recruitment in London. And how did you end up in Australia? Who brought you there?
It's a funny story because there's always somebody, isn't there? There's always someone who just taps you on the shoulder at the right time. And I remember it was November in London, and I was walking to the train station, and it was snowing and cold, and I had 3 jackets on, and, a hoodie. And I'm just starting to think, God, this is pretty savage. I'm not used to spending winters in the UK. And then I had a friend who'd moved out. He was a former colleague. He moved to Western Australia, and he sort of said to me, "Get yourself out here. Have an interview, speak to my boss." And I thought, I'll have a conversation and see what happens. And then you move very quickly from there to, that's probably not going to happen, to, right, I've got an offer in front of me, and right, let's do it.
Yeah. So that friend of yours. You need to be up for it as well, right? He throws you something, but it's up to you to do something with that.
Yeah, so you have to be up for it. And I'm always about challenges and, but opportunities, challenges and opportunities. So I'm not somebody who's just going to sit in one place and just be complacent. Yeah, I always want to challenge myself. And this to me was something that I'd never done before. It seemed like, somewhere where I could add a lot of value, somewhere where I'd sort of enjoy myself. And it kind of solved the problem that I had in that it was pretty cold and grim in London in the winter. And, Western Australia, I just had this, idea in my head of beaches and
was it beaches?
It was great. Yeah, it was I had a fantastic 3 years in Western Australia. It was everything that I thought it was going to be.
Nice. And did you travel around as well in Australia?
Not as much as you might have thought. So I hit the big cities, so Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, mainly for work. But I went over on a few sort of personal trips as well. But the big thing for me was traveling around Western Australia. there's a lot of, sort of very small destinations that are within driving distance from Perth, and we would just get in the car and go to the next one each time. And, before we knew it, we were doing 10-hour drives. To start with, it was just 2-hour drives, but absolutely fantastic part of the world that most people will never ever see.
Yeah. And did you meet your wife in Australia, or did you meet her back in the UK? And you moved
in London, actually,
okay.
In London. So I actually met her around the time I started interviewing for jobs in Australia. And,
nice time to meet.
We kind of had the conversation of, well, I've got this interview tomorrow morning, but don't worry too much about it. It's not going to come off. And then you have a conversation of, all right, well, I'm probably going to be going to Australia. And then, you sort of think, oh, this is going pretty well. Maybe I'll see if she wants to come with me. And then she, luckily she did. And, 10 years later, we're married, 2 kids, and living in Dubai for the last 6 years.
Yeah. And also, again, you need to have, at that time, a girlfriend that is up for it, that wants to have that adventure. If you're pretty early in your dating period, and it just wants to go on that adventure with you.
Yeah, it takes a very special kind of person to say yes to that kind of crazy request of someone that you've just met saying, let's move to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And at this point, she's a 22-year-old, just moved into the big city. So there's a lot of it was a big challenge, and it was something that to be honest, looking back, I didn't expect her to kind of say yes and to end up there. But it's worked out really well.
Yeah. So that's excellent. And then you were 3 years in Australia. You having a good time there. What brought you then to Dubai?
There was a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
So there were push factors and there were pull factors.
Okay.
The push factors for me, I kind of saw the end to my role in Western Australia. I was my title was manager of strategy and development for a workforce solutions company in Perth, and my job was to chase big projects and big solutions, and I really didn't see much of that in the coming sort of 3 to 5 years. So I would have had to take a step back in terms of the actual job that I was doing. And in the same respect, we were 24 hours away from home. And, the family back in the UK are not getting any younger. And I just quite like how when we're here in the Middle East, you're one flight away from being home. It's not a big sort of ordeal. If something really bad were to happen, I could drive to Dubai airport right now. I can be on a plane probably in a few hours, and I can be home in 8 hours. Whereas in Australia, you were really looking to have to choose which family events you go back for, you know? So it's like, oh my God, we've got 3 weddings to go to. I can only really go to 1. Whereas here, if it came to it, you can do 3 weekends in the year. It's not too great on your carbon footprint, so we try and not do that. But the possibility does exist for you not to have to choose between sort of 3 different weddings that happen at three times throughout the year.
I see. And what gave you the opportunity to come to Dubai? Was it the same company that you were with, or was there a new company that knocked on your door?
No, so I kind of made the decision. Well, we came here on holiday in 2015, around about September, October. And the trip was to really find out, could we live here? And obviously you stay in JBR in the Sofitel Hotel, and you have this completely skewed reality on what life's actually like. And you think,
of course we
could live here. So then we start to look at, and it was also around the same time that I could apply for permanent residency in Australia. So we sort of put a bit of a deadline on it. I said, we'll look for jobs. I'll look for a job in Dubai. If I can get a job before Christmas, which was about 3 or 4 months' time, then we'll move. If not, then we'll stay in Western Australia and go through the permanent residency process. So quite quickly, I got an offer. It wasn't necessarily the one that I was waiting for. I was really looking out for for my current role, and eventually, I think around 3 or 4 weeks later, I managed to secure an offer, and that was it. We pack up our bags from Australia, and you moved there 3 years previously with 2 suitcases, and you leave with an entire shipping container worth of things, and you get on a plane and you come and start all over again.
Wow. Yeah, and then you think you're used to it, but it's still a big step, right?
No, absolutely. And I think the move to Dubai was much bigger. It felt much bigger than the move to Australia. And you know what it's like when you first, set foot in this country. Everyone wants a deposit from you. You can't drive until you get your driver's license, but you can't get your driver's license till you get your Emirates ID. Everything works in series instead of working in parallel. So it definitely felt like a more stressful move to come here than to go to Australia. But I think once you go through that initial kind of pain period of, you're spending all your money and getting nothing in return for it, and you're going through all these quite arduous visa processes and setups, and you get yourself somewhere to live, you get yourself a car, you sort of you get a bit more settled and know what you're doing, you get well established in a friendship group, then things start to move a lot quicker for you.
Yeah. And then you have made some career steps in the past years. Can you tell us more about where you work now, where you started when you joined your company at that time in Dubai, and your journey?
Yeah, so I joined the company at the time that I joined was called NES Global Talent. So we've since merged with another organization and we've become NES Fircroft. But at the time I joined as an account manager. So we're a workforce solutions consultancy. So we do outsource hiring, direct hire, and also managed services. So my role was managing a large account in Iraq for a large oil company.
Okay.
Within about 2 weeks of joining, I quickly realized that account was going to go backwards very quickly. So whereas my role was to grow it, I was probably going to struggle to stay at the same level, and it was probably going to about half in size. So it's quite a worrying thing to realize 2 weeks into a job. But, in my role, it's always been about sales and business development. So for me, it was looking for other opportunities where we can diversify our business and new things that we can, new markets that we can enter, which is where the renewable energy stuff really started working. And don't get me wrong, I didn't set out with the goal of building a renewable energy business. We actually looked at refineries, chemical plants, all these other different industries that may have required our services. Renewables was the one that was really kicking off in Dubai, and it's the one that really took off for me and for our business. So from there, we've gone to being, the leading workforce solutions company in the Middle East renewable energy industry. We had a very, very good presence on the Mohammed bin Rashid solar project in Dubai, where at peak we had about 250 outsourced contractors working on that project. So to go from a standing start, 250, yeah. So that's 250 workers, engineers, technicians who were all, payrolled through our organization. They were all sourced through our organization and on our visas, provided medical insurance. So it was a very, very big scope of work that we won. And it wasn't just something that we picked up immediately. It was something that grew over a period of 3 or 4 years. So my team naturally grew as we were going through there. So it started out with just me. Then I got, one recruiter working with me, a couple of support people working with me. And, from there, to where I am now, I have a team of approximately 20 people who are, working on my project. We now look at conventional power as well. We look at some alternative energies, so projects like desalination, hydrogen. And my role really is much less about providing the services, but a lot more about getting the most out of the team and getting the most out of the clients and the opportunities that we have, and making sure that we have we put our best foot forward. So I think whereas in the past I was much more focused on who our clients are, what we're doing, it's more about now making sure that we are a high performing team. And I think the biggest change from when I started out in my role, I was talking about renewable energy and I was talking about recruitment. Now I'm talking about high performance, and I'm talking about what people can do in their work life, in their home lives, to get the most out of themselves. It's not necessarily about work. It's not necessarily about, their job, because we've got a team of very highly experienced people. But it's how can they get the most out of what, the hours that they put into work and the hours that they put into, personal tasks as well.
And do you think your previous experience as an athlete helps? Because in the sport world, especially when you're at that level, you need to get the best out of yourself. So in that way, it's full circle, right? You have done the job that they have been doing. You have been high performing yourself before you started in the corporate world, and then everything plus your personality comes together in that cocktail, and then you try to give people that nice juice to drink to make them accelerate.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you just said, and I do think I think there's a couple of aspects to touch on. I think the first one is the kind of the attitude and the mentality of a professional athlete, and how that can affect how you apply yourself to a job or to any personal task in later life.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel that people who've come from a sports background, they don't have an off button. It's kind of like, you're always thinking about how you can improve and improve and improve.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about people who are
athletes in general,
who are a sort of a similar background, or people that I've met. I have people on my team now who've come from national standard running backgrounds, and they have the same the same mentality. You go on teams at 10 o'clock at night and they're on green, and you just think, sometimes you just think that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
You need an off switch and you need an off button. And that sort of then comes back to the kind of the leadership side of things, of actually making sure that people do disengage sometimes. The second point is, I think there is a big, the gap in between sports performance and just general life performance is definitely narrowing. And I subscribe to Whoop, and for those of you that don't know about Whoop, it's it's a wearable. It's basically like a sort of you can see on here. It's a heart rate monitor. It measures your heart rate variability. It tells you how recovered you are on a day-to-day basis. And over the last few years, the information that's been coming out of Whoop, to start with, it was geared towards sports performance. And now it's much more now becoming geared towards getting the most out of life and making sure that people are recovered. And, they have an extremely interesting podcast, which I listen to when, I'm going out running. And one of the more recent episodes was talking about how this technology can be applied to, the military and people who are doing high risk military operations. And you wouldn't necessarily think that sports performance, life performance, and military performance could all be linked together. But I definitely think that, the lines are blurring, and people are now starting to think, what can I do in my life to get more out of me and the hours that I have? Because everyone has limited time. Yep. So how can we make the most of that time and become, first of all, more efficient and more productive?
Yeah. I have, for example, a client. He's a lawyer, and he is so incredibly fast at his emails. If I send him an email, like before I check my email, but bang, I got a reply. And I'm like, how do you do that every time? And he's like, I just manage this like this. And because I know that if I manage my emails very fast, I get 200 emails a day, he says, and I immediately respond towards the ones that are like quickly. Then I clean up like my inbox and I can focus on other things. And this was just one of the things that I was like thinking like, okay, a lot of people get stuck on that, right? They're like, I need to clean up my inbox. But coming back to your story about athletes, funny enough, when I was in my bachelor, I did an internship with Johan Cruyff College, and there were all athletes there, either swimming, football people, hockey, you name it, but all at top performing levels. They were between 17 and 23. So they wanted to make sure that they also get an education beside of just focusing on their top sport. But the dedication they had, and the parents and everybody to make it was tremendous. And I thought, if they would put that passion and dedication into a job or something, then I'm sure something great will come out of that as well.
No, absolutely, and those kind of things can definitely be applied in other walks of life. But the sad thing is that often with someone who has a professional career in sport, that career can last until you're 31, 32, even 35, 36 years old. To then have to transition and compete in the job market with people who've been already working for 15 years. Yeah. How many job adverts do you see that are written that say requires 15 years experience? Who's going to forego that 15 years of experience to go for someone who has the right attitude, but actually no experience in doing something? Recruitment for me was a really interesting career choice because I felt like, despite the fact that there were probably people who'd been doing recruitment for a few years who were the same age, I could come in and actually operate at the same level as them.
Yeah.
Because, it's an input versus output position. You don't need to know how to engineer something. You don't need to know how to actually physically do something. It's about relationships, and it's about talking to people. And that's one thing that, I've never really had an issue with.
Yeah. And also putting in like a lot of, effort, and not willing to walk away from that, seeing as a necessity. That's training, right? In the end, you're just training more hours than you're actually doing when you are actually playing the games, or if you are performing, because training is everything, right? The whole week, almost every day.
Yeah.
And you don't win prizes when you're training.
No, absolutely. And it's all. I guess the main difference is, in the recruitment world or in the sales world, I'm sure it's similar for many careers. There was a perception 10 to 15 years ago, particularly when I started my career, that the more you put in, the more you get out.
Yeah.
And that was the same in sport. You get the people who just try and train. And on race day, they're just not there. And that's because they've just overtrained to the point that they've not trained effectively. And even now in a working environment, people are starting to realize that it doesn't really, your inputs don't directly correlate to your outputs. If you're not doing things efficiently, and you come back to your inbox management, for example, I really believe, things like emails, if you don't manage them properly, there's no right or wrong way to manage it. Well, there's probably wrong ways to manage it, but there's no correct way to manage it. But if you don't have a strategy, you will never reach your full potential. Yeah. Because you will spend your whole days, you'll be sitting there trying to do some work or on a phone call, and you see the little Outlook notification, or your phone makes a ping, and you get distracted and you look at it.
Exactly. That's the thing.
If you're not thinking about how, just actually focusing on one thing, move on to the next thing, or having a plan as to what you want to get out of your day, then you're never going to reach your full potential. And I think that is another synergy back to a professional athlete, where you can do all the training in the world, but if you don't train properly, you're not going to perform.
So how do you try to get the most out of your team? How do you try to make them more efficient? How do you try to create better performance?
It has to be completely individual. So if I look at the team that I have, I have a complete spectrum of people. And I actually joke about it. If two people go off to a meeting together, you sort of laugh at them and go, what are they going to talk about in the car? They got nothing in common,
Yeah.
But everything has to be completely tailored to the individual, and it has to be dynamic. There's not one thing that's going to work this week that's going to work next week. So examples of things that we've done that are probably out the box, particularly when you talk about sales and a recruitment role, is I've said to some people, don't touch your laptop at all this weekend. Don't touch your phone. I'm going to take your phone from you. It's kind of like you need to come back on Monday morning completely refreshed.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're going to continue to go through this cycle of you come into work tired, things don't go your way, and it's a downward spiral. You sort of you go to one point and it's a negative, and then a negative, and then a negative.
Yeah.
Whereas if you reset and you come back, and then actually, I'm coming into work refreshed today, so my first couple of calls are going to go a bit better. I'm actually going to get something out of it.
Yeah.
And then you go on a positive cycle rather than a negative cycle.
Yeah.
So we've done that type of things, and to the complete opposite, which is, actually what you need to do is just completely up your volume, because either you're not working hard enough, or the work that you're putting in is not coming out of the other side. So we need to either sort of write a new business plan, or we need to up the volume, or there's loads of different strategies, but there's no one size fits all. And I think it's a consultative approach with people who are sort of working on your team, to understand what challenges they're actually going through. And if somebody's struggling, it's not just turning the pressure up. It's actually taking a step back and saying, okay, right, what's actually going on? How can we address it?
Yeah, to have that flexibility, it's also challenging for yourself, because I see a lot of other managers and leaders that they don't want to have that flexibility. It's like, this is my way, and that's it. That's the only way that I want to know, I want to use, and I don't care if it's
It's the old school manager. It's the old school manager who sits up there, and when you see the movies from when they show that NASA from the 1960s, there's an engineering manager, and there's all the engineers, and they're all working under the direction of what the guy's doing. Those days are gone. What we have now is we have to build a team based on one person not being able to do everything. I know what my strengths are, and I also know what my shortfalls are. Yeah, and I surround myself with people who are actually good at the things that I'm not good at. So that actually you're then a really effective team. So I know that if I can get into any meeting, I can sell our business really, really well. But what I don't have at the minute is a capacity to phone enough people to get all of those meetings to go and sell the business so that we'll succeed. So I surround myself with a team of people who can get those meetings, then bring me into the important ones. And that's the way that, our business is set up. We had a bit of a restructure in the team a few months ago, which gave us access to the entire Middle East region. But what that meant was we had to give up half of our oil and gas clients, and they went to other operations and other offices. And we had a team of people who probably didn't have enough work for to really justify their existence. So we have a lot of sales and business development to do. We don't really have the time to go and do it. So we have to get in front of as many people as possible, and we have to go and give the good sales pitch and sell our business really well. So it's been a busy few months, and it's probably something that you could have got really lost in if you don't have the correct team set up. Yeah.
So let's talk about the services that your company provides. So what does your company do? What they are good at, and where do you think the USPs are?
So NES Global Talent, if we go back 40 years ago when we were established in Manchester in the UK, we're set up as an energy or oil and gas contract recruitment company. So our biggest clients were the likes of BP, ExxonMobil, Shell. We were putting people onto their oil and gas projects all around the world. As we have progressed over the years, our client base has diversified significantly. We are now covering the entire energy spectrum. My team specialize within the power and renewables industry in the Middle East, which is where I lead the sort of sector. So what services are we providing? I guess I could summarize it by making sure that our clients have access to the people that they need at the time when they need it and at the right price. So that can be on a direct hire basis, so more of an executive search proposition. It can be on an outsourced basis where we're providing visas, global mobility, payroll, and the client are just getting an invoice at the end of the month for that service. Or we can go into even more detail and actually map what requirements these clients are going to have in the next 5 to 10 years. And this is something that's becoming really important for us in the Middle East alternative energies industry. So we are aware, or we project that the industry is going to need 200,000 new people within the Middle East region within the next 8 years.
That's a lot.
A lot of those people, a lot of the skill sets that are going to be required don't exist at the moment in this region in particular. If we look at something like hydrogen, there's been no hydrogen plants or no green hydrogen plants built within this region. And pretty much it's a new industry everywhere in the world. So there's a big war on talent for hydrogen. But if you look at Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, everyone's got plans for large scale green hydrogen plants. So where are the people going to come from that have the expertise to build these plants? First of all, there are a small number of people in the region that have now got a bit of experience on them. The demand for those people will be extremely high. Their salaries are going to go through the roof. Can companies then be still competitive and employ them? My thought on that would probably be no, just because of the complete lack of the real shortage of people that actually have that experience. So then we have to look at a couple of other ways where we can attract people. So you can go to countries that have probably a more established green hydrogen market at the moment. Again, not a great deal of places. Netherlands and the EU have actually been pioneering market for hydrogen over the last few years, Germany as well. And then you can look at things like markets like Australia that are still probably in a very similar situation to the UAE, but are going to have very similar demands. So the UAE or the Middle East region then almost ends up in competition with other regions around the world about how you can attract the best people to the region to make sure we can fulfill those obligations. So my role is now working with our clients to map where they think the shortfalls are going to be, or where we think the shortfalls are going to be, and work out where we're going to get the people from.
Yeah.
And there will be a very large element of training and development that's needed. We'll need to transition people from other skills, from other industries like oil and gas and traditional power generation. And also, one thing that is becoming very crucial in the Middle East region is nationalization. So if we look at things like Emiratization and Saudiization, an increasingly large number of positions will need to be nationalized moving forwards. But when you're looking at an industry where there's no expat population that have that skill set either, you really don't have any expertise to go from. And then you run the risk of essentially building these very large scale $5-6 billion projects with graduate engineers who haven't got the lessons learned from years and years and years of doing it wrong in other projects, or sort of doing something and being told, actually, no, that's probably not the best way to do it. And one last sort of point, and one service that we do provide, which is becoming increasingly popular, and I think it's maybe a little bit concerning it's becoming quite popular, is employer of record. So we have a network of offices in 60 countries, over 100 offices, and we can employ people in any of those countries for them to provide services to a client in another country. So, for example, if Saudi Arabia want a hydrogen specialist and he's based in the Netherlands, he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia, he can be engaged through an employer of record provider such as ourselves and work remotely. Now, that for me, whilst it's a great service, it's not really sustainable in the long run unless that person is paired up with a national who will then learn those skills and actually retain that knowledge within the region. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening know about the golden visa scheme within the UAE, and long-term residency schemes which are being talked about in Saudi. They're really essential for us to make sure that we fill this skills gap.
Yes, that's a tough one, because they're actually behind the curve already. Because even if you start today with more graduates in the university and more training and etc., by the time the demand needs to be met, you don't have the people. You cannot find them. So what are they going to do then? Because realistically, these people are not going to be there.
Well, I think if you look at what's happened on previous projects, so there's been a big shift since I started working in this sector in 2016, 2017. If you went to a large-scale renewables project in the UAE, most of the people that you would encounter, particularly at a sort of a technical and supervisory level, would have been working for a European contractor. And they would be here on global mobility contracts. All of the money that they're earning is going to be sent out of the country. Apart from maybe a little bit in the bars on a Thursday and Friday night, as you can imagine. But most of that spending is going out of the country. It's leaving. Whereas what's shifted over the years is now a lot more of the people who are working on these projects are people like you and I, living here, spend our money here, put our money into a UAE bank account. If you're going out to eat, you're going out to eat in a restaurant in Dubai, and just really contributing to that local economy. You're not paying social securities because that's not a thing, but most of your money is going to paying for UAE businesses. And that's been the big shift over the last few years. And the next step from that is to go to nationalization. And actually then it's going to, you're paying UAE nationals or you're paying Saudi nationals and then you're paying the GOSI and things like that are paying into the local, basically straight into the government's pockets. But the UAE's population needs to grow significantly over the coming years. There is always going to be room for expats in this market, particularly ones who have very high technical skills. And what we need to be focusing on is attracting highly skilled expats to come and not just work in the region, but settle here and live here.
Yeah. So realistically, with around 30% of women in the UAE, like Emiratis, and 70% men, according to them, that's their statistic. It's hard for them to reproduce with 1.1 million Emiratis worldwide to the levels that they need to fill up, like 200,000. So it's a tough one, because we want opportunities to be there, right? We want jobs to be there, and the jobs will be there, right? And this is why I feel like during Obama, he forecasted a lot of new jobs in alternative energy in the US, but then Trump was like, whatever, we're going to stick to the oil and gas sector, and because that's the old way of doing things. And then these jobs will be there, but who's going to capitalize on those jobs? Who's going to fill up those newly listed jobs? What is your take on it? Where do you think the biggest drive will come from in the end? Because there's only so much the Emiratis can do, the Saudis can do to fill it up with their own people.
Yeah, so I think to look at that, you have to break down the 200,000 into what are those jobs actually going to be.
Yeah.
So around 65% of those jobs are going to be on construction and installation.
They don't want to do that.
So that's still going to be a largely, I'd probably counter that by saying, there's a lot of the, sort of hands-on, manual work that's going to be done by, I guess an Eastern workforce. But I think a lot of the, construction manager, project manager, engineering manager, and engineering positions, they probably will, eventually be nationalised. But I expect most of the nationalisation to be done actually during operations. So operations and maintenance. So you'll put a plant manager in, and it's much more of a kind of a steady state, and longer term. Position.
I get it. You get somebody, and they train, like a deputy will train the chief to make sure that they are supported, and then eventually you don't need the deputy anymore, and then
but way. I mean, to answer your question, I think there's probably three key areas. One is people transitioning from from other sectors such as conventional power. We won't see any more coal-fired power stations in the Middle East. I think there was one, and now it's already been transitioned out of coal before it was even built. And then the gas-fired power stations, particularly the simple cycle stations that are really there to cope with peaks and troughs of demand, they will ultimately be phased out. The people that have got experience on them, they do have the opportunity to transition onto renewable energy and conventional energy. So that's a migration and a transition. You have nationalisation, which will come from graduate schemes and work shadowing, and that's going to be more technical and project management and maintenance positions. And the last point I think is going to be people moving from other geographies. And I think if we get it right, and I think this is actually going well. There are a lot of schemes that are happening at the moment to attract people with the right experience into the region. If that goes well, and the people that come here, I guess, are given longevity in roles, and ultimately a construction role lasts for 3 or 4 years, but then if you can move from project to project to project and create a little base here, then I think at that point that's where the remainder of the people will come from. The challenge that we will face is we don't just want a lot of very highly skilled people to come here, and then when their project's done, just go home and the expertise leaves. And if that is to happen, we need to make sure that there's a lot of nationals who have shadowed and retained that information within the region. Yeah,
because that's something that was lacking in the past with other sectors, and I think they learned from that. Because I can see that now, that this has been a large acceleration in that they've been catching up on that. And in the beginning, it's easy, right? Because somebody else is the expert, and you're like, okay, well, you're doing your job well, I probably cannot do it to your level, so I will continue you doing it. But who knows? Who's to say that you cannot do it up to their level or even better?
I mean, it's the responsibility of the end clients. There's a lot of very highly influential companies who are funding, private sector funding a lot of these large scale construction and infrastructure and renewable energy projects. And the responsibility is really going to fall on them to make sure that the expertise they bring into the country stays in the country.
Yeah. So how do you now also, like, you're focusing on the Middle East, but if you look now at what is happening between Ukraine and Russia, and Europe responding so heavily on it by saying, we need to go faster into the alternative energy. We need to have more production, more energy coming from there. I saw a joke yesterday that in Norway, in a couple of years, you can find cars on gasoline in the museum because everybody's driving electric.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, of course they still need their chips and everything like that to produce those cars, but that's a different story. But the drive is there, right? You see massive demand and investment also in China, and US is maybe catching up now on the Biden. They want to make maybe more investment. So everywhere you see this heavy drive into alternative energy, and already if I listen to you, there's this massive shortage just here, and I'm like calculating like all these new jobs, which is fantastic, right? But there will be competition from everywhere then, right, to attract them.
Absolutely. Every single region is doing exactly the same as the Middle East, and a lot of the positions that come up here. Probably there is flexibility in the skill set. You don't need an absolute expert in something, to build a solar plant or to build, I don't know, maybe sort of a wind farm, for example.
Yeah.
The person may not necessarily have to have done that exact type of project previously. But when we go into some of the very highly technical sectors, like green hydrogen, for example, and like battery storage and microgrids, you need expertise. Because without that expertise, you can't function, and the risks are obviously very high of investment in these particular projects if you don't have the right people working on them and the right skill sets. So we can't just say, well, we've always managed it in the past and we've always managed to get people, because in the past there's not always been every other region around the world going through the same, the same cycle.
Exactly.
Arguably, the Middle East is probably a little bit behind everywhere else in terms of renewable energy, and particularly things like electric vehicles, as you touched on. One of my friends has recently bought a Tesla, and he constantly is panicking about where he's going to go and charge it. He's sort of sitting there, right, we're going to go for lunch at this hotel today so I can charge my car. It's like, okay, so we're not quite there in terms of the infrastructure that's there in other regions, but we will get there. The drive is there. The UAE is definitely in a better place than other countries within the region.
That's true. And then you also have this massive amount of investment that is ready, right? So you have the demand, and then you have the pension funds that are forced by their, by the government and the people that are in the pension fund to become more sustainable. Everybody's pushing them and saying, don't invest anymore in oil and gas companies. We want you to invest in sustainability. And they are doing that now. They're allocating far more in SCG funds, and then you see also governments that are saying we're going to pump in billions and billions the coming years, from one government after another. So you see the funding, you see the demand, you see the support. That's all great. Only what's missing is the qualified people to fill up that space.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, the funding's there, the support's there. Probably the one other thing that's missing right now is the execution. There's a lot of talk about doing things, particularly if we look at green hydrogen in this region. There was a period over last year where every week a new green hydrogen plant was released in this place and in this place. And it was, right, we're going to do a $5 billion project here. We're going to do a $4 billion project here. And 1 year later, that's the only news article that's ever been released about that plant. So everyone was kind of getting on the bandwagon and saying, oh, we can do that, or we can do that. But then looking into it and thinking, well, what's the feasibility? And what do we want to get out of it? Is the demand for hydrogen actually there yet?
Yeah.
You know, if we build this plant, who's going to buy the hydrogen? That's the big, the big thing. Because when we talk about, I know a few people who've got electric cars. I don't know anyone who's got a hydrogen car. Hydrogen trucks, and hydrogen ships. Still a long way away from being a reality. Yeah,
and it's also evolving, right? For example, if I look at my in-laws, they're telling me that they invested in some sun panels in their house, and now they're selling back the electricity to the energy company. And now they're thinking about investing like 8 or 10,000 euro on this system where the whole water can be heated as well, and it's like a whole system, and they can be like independent on that as well. I'm like, I didn't know that all that technology is there, and that's individually you have all these projects that each household can do, and then a company can do that. And if people start investing like that, they become more independent as well on the energy consumption and the energy bill, but also on what they're producing themselves. So there's a shift happening, and you cannot stop that anymore. Maybe when our children grow up, they'll be laughing at us that we still had oil and gas cars driving on gasoline, because they don't exist anymore.
It'd be something that's so archaic. I can't believe it'd be like taking a steam train. It's like a novelty. It's like, oh, that's Simon. He's got a a petrol car.
Or you had these old Nokias. You didn't have any like internet on it.
Exactly. All you could do is make phone calls.
Yeah. So it's moving very fast, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And there's also a very exciting projects now which you see, like even planes that that can take off on different type of energies, and so that can also be changing. But some things are still very far away. Some things are nearby, and I think your company is focusing very specifically on what can be achieved now. Yeah. So we're looking at where we can support now. Yeah. We wouldn't get too far involved in, what's coming up unless it's from like an engineering perspective and supporting companies who are doing that research and design, which, by the way, I think will become a really important part of the industry here in the UAE. Maybe not necessarily other Middle Eastern countries as of yet, but the UAE is really trying to position itself as a country that's really at the forefront of research and development within this sector. But to come back to your previous point, the oil and gas industry is not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. As much and
as
they should also not suddenly disappear. There will be chaos.
well, exactly. Also, a lot of people are now making out like oil and gas companies are terrible companies. Whereas in reality, the world could not continue going around without them, and it's quite worrying the amount of products that we use on a day-to-day basis that require crude oil as an input. So it's not going away. Maybe it won't grow, maybe it will grow. Who knows? But ultimately, countries are now looking at how we can reduce our reliance on it, and it's never going to be, well, let's just turn the taps off as of tomorrow. And we've seen with the situation in Russia and the Ukraine, everybody all of a sudden stops buying Russian oil, and the price goes through the roof because there is still a massive demand for it. And then at the same time they're still buying it only for the spot price. Which is much higher. But coming back to your story where you were saying, okay, these are the challenges in the Middle East. So what are you seeing in terms of the coming years? Where do you think what will be happening after 2 years? Because you're making these plans with the companies, what you can fulfill. What do you see the future outlook in your sector for the coming 5 years or 10 years in this region? It's a really exciting time for the alternative energies sector in particular. And I'm saying alternative energies, I'm really considering renewables and battery storage, desalination as well. You know, water is probably one of the most precious commodities in the world, and it's something that we as a region have very little of.
Yeah.
The populations in all Middle East countries are increasing, so the water demand is also going to increase. So, desalination, the desalination process is very, very energy intensive. So if we can find a way to decarbonize that, and I know a lot of the new desalination plants in the region now have on-site solar PV elements to them, but it's still covering a very, very small proportion of that energy that's used. So it's taking a lot of grid inputs as well. So governments are going to want to reduce their reliance on fossil fuel products, and one way to do that is going to be to increase things like solar PV, solar CSP, onshore wind. They're all quite unreliable sources of energy. It's a little bit cloudy today, as I'm sure you can see. So that's going to massively affect the amount of energy that's produced. With fossil fuel power generation, it's pretty consistent. You can turn it up, you can turn it down, you can do whatever you want with it. It's quite flexible. Whereas for renewables, the big challenge is making it stable, making it actually support the grid, and battery storage, and also pumped hydro storage, which is one project in the UAE, and how we can store that energy and use it when we want, will be a really important part of making sure that it works. So as those technologies increase, as the cost of batteries, for example, comes down, if solid state batteries become commercially viable, that's the point when renewables is going to really, really take off here.
Yeah, and I also want to. I think it's also. I urge as well the young people out there to start studying and focusing on careers in renewable, either in research and development or into actually building it or managing it, because there's massive job opportunities coming up, or they probably already exist. The same way there was this tech boom that happened 10 years ago. And before that, you had other big booms. This is the next big boom.
Absolutely. And I think the lines between tech and energy will definitely blur. We see digitalization and Internet of Things and blockchain all becoming a part of every single industry around the world. So we're now talking about blockchain being used to certify the source of energy to make sure that it is truly renewable. So if you subscribe to a renewable energy tariff, how do you know that when you turn the light on, that's renewable energy?
That's why I did not switch.
The same, but we're now looking at a digital certification methodology where you can. I have no idea how this works, by the way. I'm just regurgitating information, but you can be assured that the energy that you are procuring has come from a renewable source. And that, so the kind of tech boom is going to really move into renewable energy, conventional energy, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals. Basically any industry is now going to be, if you're qualified in digitalization and blockchain, you're going to be able to apply that to many, many industries.
Yeah, and it's very funny that you said that, because when like 10 years ago, when I was in the Netherlands, like a service energy provider came to me, you can buy green energy or normal energy. The green one was 40% more expensive. And then I said, okay, how do I know if my green energy is green? How do you supply it to me? They said it all goes through the same pipeline and you just get some energy from that. I said, okay, so basically you can never guarantee me that I'm getting green energy. No, I said, okay, then what's the point?
They're not going to unplug you from one grid and plug you back into the green one. That's just not how. It's not how it works. But I think the challenging thing is exactly what you said. How can you guarantee that energy is actually green? You have no way of knowing.
Yeah, but when I do know, and when they are able to provide that data, like for example, DEWA is now providing, and the electricity bill, they show you how you're doing against your peers automatically. And then you do feel guilty if you're above. By the way, I'm not above, I'm below. But that's also because I'm traveling a lot, so I'm not using that. But still, it's good to show people, like, okay, how is your consumption? When are your higher months? And also when are you how are you consuming a lot?
It's an awareness. It's an awareness of what you're doing and what your impact is, and that's one thing that has definitely come out of DEWA in the last 3 or 4 years. Is that that detail? Now when you go away, you can activate away mode, and it tells you whether you've got excess usage, so if there's a leak in your apartment, so you don't come back and you've just been wasting water for 2 weeks. Now there's two sides to that. One is I don't want my apartment to be ruined when I'm on holiday, but two is the wastage. Is actually being aware of what energy and what resources you're using.
Fantastic. And Daniel, the last question is for you. Okay, so we touched a little bit on the outlook, but is there something that you would like to share with the people here that have not asked you, or something that you think like, okay, this would be a good thing for people to know? No,
look, I think we are at a very, very exciting time for the renewable energy industry, and the Middle East is really embracing it. If you'd have said to me 6 years ago, you're going to be living in Dubai and you're only going to be working on renewable and conventional power, I would have said, well, yeah, but it's probably all going to be conventional. It's the opposite. Every single thing that everyone's talking about here is renewable energy. If we go back to 4 or 5 years ago, I sat at a conference in Dubai at the Westin. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a minister for energy from a Middle Eastern state. I won't name the one, who stood up at the end of a presentation from the chairman of DEWA and said, well, I think all your plans in renewable energy is wonderful, it's great, but I just have one question for you. We have lots of oil in the Middle East. Why don't we just burn the oil? And to see where we've come from that time to now, and the DEWA chairman's answer was very political, I must say. It was a lot of people in the room were sort of commended him on how he answered it. But I think from where we've come from then to where we are now, the region is shifting, and we have to all embrace it. We have to be a part of it. So things like electric cars and things like hydrogen, they will be a really important part of our industry moving forwards, and we just don't know exactly what the true impact of it is going to be. But exactly what you said. You've got kids. I've got kids, and it's not about the impact on our lives. It's about the impact on theirs and their children, and the future of our energy security. Super exciting times ahead, like you said, and it's great to be in a job where you can make so much impact also for the coming generations. Thank you so much, Daniel Brook, for being here, for sharing your insights, your thoughts, and your knowledge with us. It was my pleasure hosting you. Thank you very much, Simon. It's been a really good chat. Okay, this was Simon Snowden. This was the end of the 11th podcast. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Goodbye.